today's guest is one of the UK's, I'm going to say it, she's one of the world's leading experts on internal communication, and I am absolutely thrilled that she said yes to coming on the show. It's Rachel Miller. A former journalist with more than 20 years internal comms experience, Rachel advises many of the world's best-known companies through her consulting business, All Things IC. She's a fellow of the Institute of Internal Communication and the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, CIPR. And in 2020, she was awarded the CIPR's President Medal. She's an industry thought leader in the University of Florida's IC Research Hub and the author of 2 books, Internal Communication Strategy, published in 2024, and Successful Change Communication, published this year, 2026. Rachel is a highly sought-after keynote speaker, as well as host of the popular Candid Comms podcast. And if you haven't listened to it, what are you doing with your time? Go and listen to it now, but not until you've listened to this episode. Well, hello there. Welcome to Manage with Confidence with me, your host, Dr. Hayley Lewis. Each episode, I'll explore common issues that people managers like you often grapple with. For example, giving negative feedback or keeping your team motivated during change. Or maybe you're trying to manage people with diverse needs. I'm here with you, giving you support when you need it so that you can manage with confidence. So sit back, grab a cuppa and find out what to expect from today's episode. Rachel, welcome to Manage with Confidence.
Thank you for inviting me. Lovely to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited. So let's just get on, because I know you're kind of pulled in so many different directions. You're so sought after, so we'll just crack into the conversation. So I read Successful Change Communication a couple of months ago, and I've been raving to everybody about it. So whilst you and I, we're kind of in different fields, but overlapping at times, particularly when it comes to change. So I've been telling all my clients and friends to buy it. One of my favourite things in the book is your point that people managers are an important communication resource channel during change. So in your mind, what do people managers bring uniquely that maybe other senior leaders, executives don't?
I think the role of people managers is so important. It's crucial day to day, particularly when we're communicating change. They are such a vital part of the organisation in bringing change to life, particularly. They know their team the best. So when I'm trying to plan organisational communication and trying to plan change comms, whenever it feels like I need to work well with people managers, and I had this when I was working in-house. I worked in-house for 10 years, and I would have quite difficult conversations with people managers about a complicated change, because they're always complicated. To communicate simple change, I would have conversations around communication is in my job title, but it's in your job descriptions, and you're not doing me a favour if you are asking me to delegate the responsibility for communication. You're delegating it to the comms team. You need to communicate well with your team. And whenever I've had pushback, and I often had pushback and still do as a consultant, I ask the question, who knows your team the best? And the answer always is, well, I do. And I say, well, why would you possibly want to outsource this really complicated change, this emotional stance, state that we're going through? Why would you possibly let anyone else communicate that with your team? Just to really help them focus, because when you're communicating change, what people managers can do brilliantly that is harder if you are the comms team or if you are leaders is really know your team from the inside out. So what makes them tick? What is the way that this change is communicated? What is it that will really resonate for your team? And that's not impossible to do if you are a comms team or a leader, but it doesn't feel the same. The experience isn't the same when you're an employee. So your immediate line manager or people manager is often the very best person to communicate change, to make it relevant, to make it understandable. So you understand that magic question that we ask in internal communication is, what does it mean for me? People managers are amazingly good at doing that. And if they're not, then that's where we should equip them and help them.
Absolutely. And it kind of makes me think, so about 20 years ago, I was working at the BBC and moved into local government to set up an in-house organisational development function, which included internal communication. And we did the first ever employee survey. And the group that was most trusted by non-managers were their line manager. And the further away a person was in terms of their seniority from an employee, the less they were trusted. So there's something as well around the levels of trust, I think, that team members will have in their line manager, or should have, hopefully, in their line manager. And so that makes a lot of sense to me, Rachel. I wonder also what your thoughts are. I work with a lot of people managers. I'm just finishing coaching a group of people managers in a local authority around managing change, including communication. And we talk about them being translators. Often what can come out from the board or from the corporate centre, sometimes very dense corporate speak. And so I think there's a role for people managers in translating that into something they know will have meaning. What are your thoughts on that?
That's such an important role. I think sometimes it is translating literally into local languages, where particularly if you are multinational global organisation and you have a corporate centre. That my very first internal comms job was at an automotive company that had spun off from Ford called Vistion. So I suddenly found myself responsible for communicating in 8 different languages in factories across Europe and South America, which was quite the first internal comms job to have. It was quite a shock. And my goodness, I learned so much. And what I realized was that the center was the headquarters in Detroit, in Michigan. I was working from Essex, from England in the UK. And actually, when I was trying to communicate with factories across Europe, then English was not the language that most people spoke first. English was our business language, but actually, particularly when we were communicating change to systems, processes, safety, particularly, then I needed to make sure that my colleagues understood absolutely beyond reasonable doubt what was being asked of them or the way that they now needed to work. So my shift supervisors, line managers, factory regional managers and factory and plant managers were crucial for that conversations, because without them translating into local language to help their people truly understand what was happening, what their role was, then no communication would have happened. It would have been information. It would have been broadcast very much one way. So the translation bit there and the trust there, you're absolutely right, is they are the most appropriate people to have those conversations, to make sure that their team understand that we want to keep you safe. And this is what these changes mean for you, and in their native language. So really important.
Yeah. On the podcast, as I know with yours, I like to keep things practical. People managers are, I think, often the most burdened, stretched, squeezed, however you want to describe it. And one of the things I come across, if ever I'm running sessions to skill them up, whether it's about change or something else, you can almost feel the big sigh and the shoulders drop, like another thing to add to my to-do list. And let's keep it kind of practical and straightforward. So you're obviously an internal communication expert. You live and breathe creating change comms plans, for example. What's your advice for a team manager when it comes to developing a change comms plan at their level? What's the first starting point?
Most important thing for me is giving people a really practical framework to use. I'm a big fan of sketching things out on flip charts and then talking people through frameworks and models. And that's one of the most beautiful things about being invited to write books is I can now share those frameworks and models that have lived in my head, heart, notebooks and on whiteboards inside offices and factories for many years. But one of the frameworks that I use is a relevancy framework. So when we're communicating change, normally we do global, local, me. So global will be company-wide information. So maybe we are trying to save money inside an organization. Maybe there's restructures or redundancies. So the global level message will be, we need to save £20 million over the next year. There are going to have to be some restructures and changes in the organization. And then there's that killer line. Your line manager will tell you all about it. And that's the switch from global to local. And then local to me is the line manager having a conversation with their team to answer what does this mean for me? So I've planned change communication like that for years. I've planned intranets like that for years. Global news at the top, then local, then me. But if you've ever observed anyone accessing an intranet, an internal website, they scroll straight to the bottom to get to my team, my department, my region, my brand, things that I identify with. So when I'm trying to help leaders understand how to communicate change really effectively, I flip the model and I start with me. So imagine you've heard the conversation from the CEO in perhaps an all staff or town hall. Then we've done that switch from global to local. If in that local conversation, the line manager starts with, we need to save £20 million over the next year, I'm not listening because I want to know, what does this mean for me? So in those conversations, I will flip the model to be something like, when that people manager is with their team, I've got some difficult news to share. We are impacted by the changes. Let me tell you what I know. Then you bridge out to local, then you bridge out to global. And that I find as a mindset, really more than anything else, is actually, what does this mean at a global level? What does it mean at a local level? What does it mean at a me level? Helping people managers be able to articulate that. It goes back to the conversation we just had about relevancy. The reason they're so well placed to communicate change is because at every level, the lens they're looking through is their team. They know the change memory. They know the experience they've gone through before. They know what's the most appropriate language to use, both in terms of the words they're using and also the language that they're speaking. So as a mindset and as a framework, that works really well to just help people focus and not miss out a step as well.
Yeah. What was coming to mind is, as you shared that, Rachel, a previous guest, Leanne Davey, we were talking about productive conflict in that episode, and she talked about making it a habit, not a big event. And I think there's something around that with change as well. There was a bit in your book that has really stuck with me. And when I've shared it with groups of managers, it lands so well, which is the point you make about the different categories of change. You've created this lovely categorization, which essentially at its heart says change is everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
It's not just the big stuff. Like in local government, you've got the local government review at the moment, which is front of mind for lots of my clients. But it could be a team member going, and then you've got to onboard a new team member, or the CEO dies, or it could be an unexpected inspection and a report from that. And it's been really interesting. I can almost see the light bulbs over people's heads when, oh, okay, change is just all the time. And I talk about the stuff with my team all the time. I just want to say thank you for that, because it's been it's made such an impact. And I've been working in this field a long time and I hadn't thought about it like that. So
I'm glad that's helpful. I think even overlaying the relevancy model into that and really looking at, so when I identified different types of change, there's 31 different types of change that I've identified and 7 clustered. So I've grouped them into clusters. But when I'm looking at an organisation, and particularly if I'm working with leaders or people managers, just taking a moment to give your head a wobble and actually just think about your team and go, actually, this is the global change that we're communicating. What else is going on? And it might be that there's a long-serving member of the team who is leaving, or someone's about to go on parental leave, and that's going to make a big impact to the team. So even that global, local me, just running that through as a people manager, where are my team at right now? What are the global changes we're facing? What are the local changes? And what are the really personal changes in circumstance that people are going through? Because you can't be a great leader without being a great communicator. But that starts with really rooting your practice and your professionalism in insights. So what you know about your people and what they're facing, and coming into any conversation as a people manager with real understanding of where your people are at informs everything. It informs the tone, it informs the timing, it informs so many different things. So we do put a lot of pressure on our people managers for sure inside organizations. And I think that's where my role particularly, and the role of internal communicators and HR professionals, is how do we look after those people? How do we nurture them and set them up for success? Because they're looking after everybody else.
Yeah. My next question, it might be a little bit unfair, and feel free to push back.
Go.
Because as a psychologist, my stock response whenever I'm asked a question is it depends, and context matters. But also a lot of people like certainty. So you've already talked about the me bit and what does this mean for me? But are there any other common questions in your experience that employees experiencing change, particularly turbulent change, that they typically will ask?
Yeah. Why this? Why now? Why me? And if you're writing a change plan that doesn't address those three, then we've got a problem. The biggest question I find when I listen to employees inside organizations, and the biggest concern often they have, is there actually a plan here? Because lots of promises can be made and lots of grand statements can be shared inside an organization. But one of the biggest questions, which fuels the why this, why now, why me, or why us, is what's the bigger plan here? And for me, the language around change communication has to be rooted in your purpose, whether you're curing patients, selling widgets, transporting people. How is what you're proposing enabling you to do that? And when it feels like there's a heck of a lot of pressure inside an organization and constant change, being able to come back to explaining why we're doing what we're doing, how it links into our organizational purpose, can help with the why this, why now, why me, because you're really trying to bring what you're doing to life. You're bringing your organizational strategy and your plans to life in a day-to-day way for your employees. So it doesn't feel like we're off in the boardroom coming up with strategies, but we know you're asking real fundamental questions. You need to have that correlation. You need to be able to talk the language of employees as well as expecting them to talk the language of the business.
Yeah. Now, obviously, with people managers, they're also employees, and depending on the change, they might not agree with kind of what's rolling out. One of the things that I have been working on with a group of managers is helping them create their almost like a script. Because when you've got so much in your head, stuff, it can be hard to remember. And they don't have to read it out verbatim, but even just knowing it's there can act as a bit of an anchor, a bit of reassurance. But we had a really interesting conversation in this group. And this question's really, I'm hoping some of them will listen to this. So this question is kind of on their behalf. How can managers localize a corporate change message for their team without going off script?
Such a great question.
That's laundry.
I've seen the opposite. I've seen a manager have a script and then literally put it down on the table and be like, I am not reading off that. They, whoever they are, want me to read that. And he pushed up his shirt sleeves and was like, right, let's get real. And he thought he did the best job ever. And I was sat at the side of the room watching, thinking, oh my goodness, what is this? And afterwards he came over full of swagger and he was like, so what did you think? And I said, help me understand what just happened. What was that? And he said, well, I thought it would be really great if I really got in with them and showed that I was open. And I said, yep, can see you're thinking, but you missed out some key information that was on that sheet of paper that is based on questions that we know employees are asking. And I can see why you wanted to do that, but actually we now need to follow up and we need to send written to that exact same team for all the things that you've missed. And he said, oh, so you don't think I did a good job? I said, I think you did a good job. But if I was to ask your colleagues and ask your team, you didn't address their questions and they didn't ask you either. And I think it's because when you're with leaders and they think they're doing a good job, you're not able to, I've written about this in my book as hierarchy inhibits honesty. You can't be honest. You will look at the job title and not be honest. I don't have that problem as an internal communicator because we're very used to having these sorts of conversations. When you're working with people managers and you don't want them to go off script, you do want them to be able to communicate what's needed. That's really important. I'm not a fan of having this robotic, like everyone sounds exactly the same and it's corporate speak. So I describe this as you need flexibility within boundaries. But I'm going to set some boundaries and the boundaries will be you need to talk about these things. Exactly how you do it could be you'll know your team better than anyone else. So listening is such a key skill for me for people managers. You need to be knowing what's top of mind for your people. You need to be approaching a difficult conversation, particularly rooted in employee insights. So when you're having a conversation, you might go off script because that's appropriate for your team. Because actually the change memory that they hold, where perhaps they've gone through a similar experience a year ago, and it was painful and they're still bruised from it and they're still not quite recovered from it. That's where the flexibility comes in for me, that I trust my people managers to know their team and know where they're at. Where I've had this conversation with people managers where I say things like that and I get back, oh, I don't know that I can answer these questions. I don't know that I do know what's top of mind. That's a broader conversation about what it means to be a people manager and the skills you need to have as a communicator, particularly. So being able to listen well, really important. being able to make sure you've covered what you need to cover. The reason you've been given a script or talking points isn't to control what you're saying, it's to create consistency across the organization so that every people manager is having conversations with their team. You're having that same experience for your colleagues, that they're getting the same information, ideally at the same time. How they get it may vary depending on the leader's communication style, but that consistency is crucial.
Yeah. The other thing that kind of popped up as you were talking there, it's a big part of what I'm focusing on at the moment, is emotion regulation. Because I was coaching a manager recently and he said, I don't agree. I'm really quite angry with what's happening. Now, that's okay. And actually, he was in a confidential space with me. And I know a lot of HR folk listen to this podcast and chief people officers. So my plea there is think about the spaces you create for people managers to make sense of stuff, because making sense of it and processing their emotions in front of their team is not it.
Yes, indeed. I'm in fierce agreement with you.
Right?
Yeah, it's so important. I think it's given them the space to voice their upset or their frustration. I remember writing about that in the book in Successful Change Communication, about creating peer networks. So giving people a chance to practice having difficult conversations. If you've never had it before, you've never had to tell someone that their role's at risk, that's a big thing to do. So, and you might have experienced it yourself as an employee. You know how it feels. So wherever I can, I try and build in peer networks, not least to give people a chance to practice, but also to hear the negativity, to hear the, why on earth are we doing this? Or I've told my team there's no more change happening and now I need to go back and you're making me look bad. All of that. We need a space for that, because that emotional regulation, you're absolutely right. They need to let it out because they're human. They may be feeling really emotional. They know their team are up against it. They've got sales targets or there's something happening in the market that's really big. And it feels like the change could be a distraction. And they're hesitant to communicate. Like all of that, those conversations are really important to have. So building in safe spaces constantly for people managers is a good thing. Having that peer network, where I did it with a client where I got people managers together. We knew that organizational changes were coming up. We were in a 5-year cycle of change in the organization. So it wasn't giving anything away to get them together and practice having difficult conversations, because they knew what was coming. They've been quite transparent, but they'd never had that opportunity to say really difficult phrases out loud. And so I gave them that space, and we had anger, we had tears, we had all sorts. It was a really emotional room, but I was really proud of them because they did it. And more importantly, they felt confident in leaving that room to go and have those conversations with their teams. I was asked twice, you're better at this than us, can you do it? And I said exactly what I said earlier, who knows your team the best? Your team deserve you, so let's make this. They're not going to like what you say. It's not a great time for them. But better to have a quality conversation, better to go in with an open heart and an open mind, and ideally on script, to make the best conversation that you can.
Yeah. Thinking about safety, that makes me think about inclusion, something that I know you are hot on for a variety of reasons. What are your top tips, Rachel, for things that managers can do to make their change communication and engagement as inclusive as possible?
It's so important. There's many things you can do. And I think I didn't realise quite how many things there are that you can do until I've been doing lots of research recently in recent years on neurodivergence, particularly. I have 3 children. 2 of them have both been diagnosed with autism and ADHD each. I also discovered through diagnosis for them that I have ADHD. Everything now makes sense. And I've realised how many own goals that I've scored in my organisational communication. When I look at how I've communicated change, I always plan for the frontline workers, the hard to reach, the people not on devices, the people who are working shifts, the people who are unionised. You slice and dice an organisation in so many different ways from an audience demographic perspective. But the lens I've never really looked through was neurodivergence until I couldn't help but look through it because of my family situation and trying to help my children navigate the world and make sense of the world around them and how I need to communicate, particularly communicating change with them. So if I'm looking at an organization and helping people managers to plan for inclusivity, it starts again with listening, really understanding your team, really being clear of what their needs are. Sometimes people disclose what their needs are. Sometimes they don't. I'm hard of hearing. I lip read. I wear a hearing aid. I talk about that a lot more now. I never used to. And just before we started recording, I was telling you, it's such a normal part of the way that I now communicate, and I'm able to advocate for my needs to make every opportunity that I'm trying to have, every conversation I'm trying to have, work well for both parties. If you think about that from a change perspective, it means things like not just giving a verbal update, but following up in writing as well. Or if I think about my son, particularly, our twins are 11, for my son, I need to tell him one thing at a time. I can't give him a whole long list of things. So I will talk about now and next. Now we're going to do this, next you'll do that. The boys are just about to go to high school in September. So as we're recording this in July, I'm doing a lot of change comms with my boys to help them prepare to go to senior school. And I'm using all the techniques that I would be using with people managers. I'm doing multiple formats of information. I'm doing pictures, I'm doing diagrams, I'm doing lists, I'm doing now and next, I'm doing a sequence, a timeline of planned events, all the things. So the number one thing is not to assume, and not to assume you know what people need, whether they've disclosed their accessible needs or not. It's really important to ask people to check for understanding. Particularly, one of the biggest mistakes I see in organizations, particularly when it comes to change communication, is assuming that everyone understands what's going on. And that's both for neurotypical and neurodiverse colleagues. So if you are using phrases like digital workplace, if you don't explain what digital workplace means, and you merrily go along communicating, and you wait until 6 months, 12 months down the line to do a bit of measurement, and you find out at that point that digital workplace didn't make sense for your people on day one, let alone 6 months or 12 months down the line, it's too late. And I hear that in focus groups or qualitative insights for employees who will say, when I'm checking for understanding, I'm testing for recall. These are two things we can do. So does this make sense? Or tell me what you know about this. The feedback will be, I've never known what that phrase is. I kept waiting for it to be explained. They didn't, so it can't be important. So I just parked it. Anytime I see anything related to that, I just ignore it. Oh my goodness. Imagine if you knew at the end of week one that phrase wasn't resonating. So there's something there for me in the role of people managers particularly is checking for understanding. So do you understand what's going on? What do you need from me as a manager? How can I help you? What questions do you have? Because let's be candid, the frequently asked questions documents are normally frequently asked questions from the comms team. They might not be informed by frequently asked questions that employees have, certainly not at the start of a change. They might change as you go throughout. But actually testing for recall is, what do you know about this? Help me understand what you know about this change, or what do you expect to happen next? Questions like that. So building that into business as usual communication is really valuable, because it's not just during change we want to check for understanding. Do our employees know how we're curing patients, selling widgets, transporting people, how they show up every day? We're trying to motivate and inspire and engage them. Then actually planning for everybody is important.
Yeah. One of my favourite things to have done recently is work with a group of managers, and together we all created a toolkit based on reactions to change. So there's a fairly new model out, and it's been tested in different organisational contexts. So it's not just a theory. It's great because things like the Kubler-Ross change curve are inappropriate. That was created for a different context. So this has been created for organisational change. And exactly the conversation we're having here, Rachel, has come up. Just the realisation of, I need to do different things and have different strategies and tools depending on someone's background, someone's education level, someone's lived experience, but also their reaction, their emotional reaction to the change, and recognising that how someone feels one week might change the next. So this idea of one size fits all, this idea of static approaches just doesn't work. And that's been brilliant. So there is something about managers having access and thinking about the range of things, where one of the things that came up in our conversation is about somebody had noticed a member of their team had a formerly very vibrant very talkative and over time had become more and more withdrawn as this digital change was rolling out. And the manager's go-to had been team meetings to communicate stuff in team meetings. And in our group coaching session, there was this realization of, one-to-one will be better. Because when we explored it, we said, well, what might be going on there? And there's often they thought, well, actually, is the person fearful? Do they feel stupid because they don't know, but they don't feel safe to say they don't know? Is there something undiagnosed going on? And so this realization that, I can talk about this stuff one-to-one. It doesn't just have to be it as a team all the time. So if you're a people manager listening to this, I think it can be really helpful. Rachel is a big user of stationery, like me. So get that stationery out, get that flip chart paper out, and just spend some time mapping out the different ways you can communicate with the different types of people in your team. And in the show notes, I'll put links to useful resources on Rachel's website. And I've got a checklist as well, a downloadable checklist of things to think about that you can access in the show notes. Now, one of the things you say in your book, Successful Change Communication, is ambiguity scuppers change communication. So how can managers balance honesty about the unknowns and the uncertainty with the need to maintain people's confidence and momentum and energy?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? That's what people want. They want certainty more than anything in change. People crave certainty. And that's one of the hardest things to be able to give. There is a really important role there for people managers to be honest and to maintain momentum. Both of those things are really important. We talked earlier about the questions people ask are because they need to know that there's a plan. So where you possibly can, the advice I have for people managers is to maintain honesty with your team, is to reassure them that there is a plan. But actually, if all the details aren't known yet, you can say that. Where I practice working out loud a lot, and I advocate for this a lot inside organizations, where if you know you're going through complicated change, long running change, and there will be periods of quiet, like maybe a consultation period with unions. So you might have 30 days, 90 days where it feels like nothing is happening. Behind the scenes, of course, things are absolutely happening. There is conversations and consultations that are going on. To maintain honesty, when I look at organizations, when they choose to say nothing because those conversations are going on, that's where trust breaks down, where it feels like, is there a problem with the plan? So working out loud for me is really important for people managers to realize that just shining a light on conversations are happening. Things are progressing. If you can't do a timeline with dates on, which is what people want because they're craving that certainty, doing that planned sequence of events, we expect this to happen, then this to happen, then this to happen. Being able to communicate, we are 45 days into our 90-day consultation period. Cracking, we're on track. Brilliant. Say that. Often saying nothing is not the answer. If you want to be open and if you want to be honest and you want to build trust and you want to have momentum, saying nothing or waiting for the perfect time, which spoiler, it's never going to come, isn't the thing to do. I describe this as creating certainty of communication, even if you can't give certainty of content. So saying things like, if it is a long running change, that you will be updated via this particular channel. So every Monday, there will be an update on whatever the change might be. And actually from week to week, and this is quite a tension actually inside organizations where I've had this almost butting heads when I was in-house and now as a consultant, where people managers and leaders push back and say, but if there's nothing to say, why would we say something? And that's not communication. That's information. That is broadcasting. The mindset for me is when it feels like we don't know what to say, you need to be listening. Communication needs to be still happening. You need to be checking for understanding, testing, recall, all those good things we talked about. But more than that, you need to be listening to your team. What is it that's concerning them? What are the rumors? What is it that's not clear? That insight is really valuable to feed that back to whether it's HR or your comms team. That's vital, because if not, we'll be merrily carrying on doing what we're doing and not bringing people with us. So communication doesn't stop when it feels like, but we haven't got anything new to say. Then double down on listening.
Oh, I love that, Rachel. And because obviously we've focused a lot on people managers communicating and engaging with their team, but they are part of that feedback loop. They are a conduit.
That's it.
Up, down, across. So there's always something that can be done. Back when I was a people manager, so when I was a service head in local government, I had the unfortunate moniker of being the restructure queen. I mean, there was one year I did 3 restructures in the year because of budget issues. And it was really interesting. Other kind of service heads used to comment on, because every Friday I'd put an email out, even if there was nothing to say. And others commented on that because they felt it put pressure on them to do the same with their change. And for me, it was a non-negotiable, even if I was just repeating what had been said, because not everybody will have picked that up. But there was something about my contract, in inverted commas, with my team. I will send something out to you every Friday and I'll update the FAQs. And even if it meant me staying late to do it, because for me, the moment I knew I broke that, it was game over, particularly when people were losing their jobs. So I really resonate with kind of what you're saying. We touched on it earlier about kind of the emotional reactions to change. And part of that for some people is what we call resistance to change. In your experience, Rachel, what are the signs that somebody's resistant?
I think people often resist being excluded from change. It might not be that they are resisting the change per se. There might be something else going on. And actually, what they might be offering resistance against might not be the actual change. It might be the way things are being communicated. It might be that because things are uncertain, it might be that there's a lack of involvement. There could be all sorts of things going on there. So I think the key bit for me is to observe body language, and it's going to be quite physical. You can see it. So if, for example, you typically have a town hall or all staff where people ask lots of questions and they've been asking lots of questions about this particular change, and then they stop, that would be a red flag for me. And it's not that they're necessarily resisting the change. It's that it could be all sorts of reasons. They might be, don't really want to talk about the change anymore. I'm done. They're resisting that sap on their energy and they're trying to protect themselves and put that barrier in place. So not engaging and not asking questions is a sign for me that something has changed. If the cadence, if the rhythm of questions has been really frequent and then it stops, why is that? Could be that people are resistant to change. It could be that a decision has been made between the 2 town halls. So again, it's listening. It's really understanding what is causing the behaviour to be different here. If people suddenly were very visible and now cameras are off and corridors are quiet and break areas are quiet, or people aren't staying late, there's real physical things that you can see. Whenever I go to a client's site, I try and experience that feeling. I want to really absorb the employee experience. Like, what does it mean to be an employee here? What is it like in this particular location or in this particular floor? Sometimes I've been to buildings and the floors feel different from each other. And it's because of the management style or because of the impact of change they're going through. You can feel it, that real physicality of the impact of change, particularly. So be really clear what we mean by resistance. Like, what does that look like? What does that feel like? What does that sound like? And it will be different for different people. It can be tempting to look at the sentiment, to the tone of questions that come in and say, there's loads more questions that have come in. Our employees are up in arms. They're resisting the change. Are they? Or are they checking for understanding? So really look deeply at exactly the language that's being used, exactly the tone and exactly the sentiment, because it might not be that they're resisting. It might actually be that they're moving into acceptance. So don't judge too quickly.
I also think, though, and I've said this for a long time, resistance gets a bad rap. How to overcome resistance. I mean, there's so many LinkedIn posts and articles written about this, and it's just data. And in some instances, people have the right to be upset because they're losing their job or they're losing their sense of identity if it's really wrapped up with a specialist area of expertise, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But there's this framework that I referred to earlier. That one of the main, so they've done several studies testing it across different organisations, and every time what comes out is active resistance is better than passive disengagement. All too often, silence is seen as acceptance. But as this model shows, there's a group within silence and kind of low activity and low engagement who are withdrawing, who are not in a good space. But we lump them in with those who've just accepted, who are just silent. So it's just data. And actually, whether we like it or not, sometimes that group of active resistors, the ones who speak up in meetings or push back or ask the question, they're saying important things. So your point earlier about it's really important that we listen, because sometimes they might say that important thing that if we ignore it, could make the difference between a system failure as it rolls out, or in extreme circumstances, someone dying. Margaret Heffernan talks about this in Willful Blindness with things like Grenfell Tower. There's something about don't just dismiss and get annoyed by your resistors. And it's not a personal attack at you. Sometimes there's gold in that resistance.
Yeah, always. Whenever I'm running focus groups with clients and they say, oh, I know who to invite. I'm like, let me just help you understand what good looks like from my perspective. I don't want a room of, I call them positive pennies and negative Nigels. I don't just want positive pennies who are going to agree with everything. And that's not a gendered thing deliberately, but I don't want just positive people. I need to hear the negativity because there'll be a reason behind it. And that's really valuable. I need to hear, what is it you've got beef with? What is it that actually is concerning you and is worrying you? That's what good listening is. That's what good qualitative insight is for me. It's not just hearing the nice things, but actually it is gold. You're absolutely right that people have got a strong view, but what's informing it? Is it the change memory? Is it because they're bringing in how they've been treated before? Probably. I need to know that. If I know it, I can do something about it.
Exactly. It's something you can work with. When there's silence and people are disappearing, you can't do anything with that.
No.
So I would much rather the resistors in all their colours and guises, because it's data. Now, we get to the quick fire questions that I've been asking all my guests. If you could change one thing about how organisations support managers with communicating change, what is it?
Give them an opportunity to practice, to build in time for that peer-to-peer practice. Don't do it last minute just before they're making an announcement the next day. Set them up for success. Make it really clear. This is what you can expect from us as an organisation, and this is what we expect from you. That really good transactional relationship that is rooted in good peer-to-peer networks. Help them. People like you are doing things like this. Get them to work together.
Lovely. What is a myth about communicating change that frustrates you?
I have so many myths. There's so many things. The number one for me is that communicating change is solely down to the comms team. It is too important to be left to one team, one department, one person. It's everyone's responsibility. So if you are communicating change inside an organisation or planning change inside an organisation, and on your project plan, communication is a checkbox, do not go to the comms team at the last minute or comms person, whoever comms is set up in your organisation, and say, right, we now need to communicate this. So it's not right and it's not fair that communicating change is just down to a comms team.
What is one management behaviour or skill that is fundamental to communicating change well?
The management behaviour or skill that I think we need to practice and get good at is relevancy. So when you know you're being asked by whoever in your organisation to translate global to local to me, what do you do? How do you do that? So being able to do that requires you to be open to feedback, to really look at what does this change mean in my team, my department, my region, our country, and really think about it. And if you're not sure what it means, then this is where we can seek out answers. That skill is critical because we rely on that inside organisations for our people managers to know how to turn ideas, thoughts, strategies, change to make them relevant for their team. So that is a really good muscle to work. It's a really good skill to crack.
Lovely. And then just the last thing. So if there was just one thing you'd advise a manager listening to this episode to do, what is it?
Being open to feedback. So if you are a people manager, ask your team for 360 feedback about how well or not you communicate change. And that requires you to be brave. It requires you to be really courageous and really vulnerable, to be open to feedback. But doing that is so important because all the things we've talked about, checking for understanding, testing recall, tailoring and making things really relevant for your team. Are you any good at it? How do you know if you're any good at it? So if you're not, it can be really useful to know this in the downtime. Let's hope that there is a lull between change and you can work with your team. And as part of your working out loud and working on your role as a people manager, it's okay to say, it matters to me that I communicate well with you. I would really appreciate your feedback. What works, what doesn't, what could I do better? Maybe use a recent change, because there'll be one, that you can ask for really good feedback and take that constructively, because what you're dealing with is people's emotions. And when you are a people manager, you are trying to nurture your team and you're trying to guide them. So do so from a place of, this really matters to me, help me improve, and be open to that feedback.
Lovely. I'm a big fan of that. The first half of season 1 was about feedback and conflict in relationships. And one of the things I talked about with a guest, Caroline Katz, whose expertise is feedback, is about managers asking for feedback. You've got a role model.
Totally
show that feedback is not something to be scared of, but it starts with you. Now, if there was one thing that I would suggest to listeners, it's grab a copy of Rachel's book, Successful Change Communication. I cannot get across how full of helpful, practical ideas and accessible wisdom it is. So get your hands on a copy as soon as possible. Rachel, thank you. Where can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Rachel Miller, or my website is allthingsic, letter I, letter C, allthingsic.com. And if you go to the Kogan Page website, which is my book publisher, so KOGANPAGE.com, and use the code Rachel Miller, you can save 25% off my books and any other Kogan Page title.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rachel. There's just, I've been waiting for this day and it hasn't let me down. So thank you so much. And pleasure. Thank you for listening. Thank you. I could have listened to Rachel all day. I could have chatted with her all day. But as you can probably imagine, just from listening to Rachel's wisdom and warmth and incredible knowledge, she's in very high demand. So I couldn't get to keep her. So much stuff to take away. I think the 3 things that jump out for me that I see come up in much of the work that I do in change as a psychologist is, first of all, this thing about relevancy. Rachel talked about relevancy, the what's in it for me. And if you remember in the episode, she talked about the traditional model is the global message feeding through to the local message, feeding through to kind of the individual, the me bit. But it can be really powerful to invert that, to turn it on its head and start with me, then local, then global. So taking that kind of me first approach can be really helpful, because then we can mirror the language that people are using. We can acknowledge how they feel, and we can use that information to not just improve how we communicate and engage during change, but also to improve the change and the outcome of the change itself. I think the second thing that really landed with me was the focus on inclusivity. If you have a look at Rachel's stuff on LinkedIn and Instagram, if you read her brilliant articles on her website, she is all about inclusivity. And she obviously shared her own personal circumstances of having neurodivergent children and having ADHD herself. And again, it reminds us as managers that one size fits all approaches rarely work, because every human is unique. And whilst there'll be some things in common, it's really important we take the time to get to know and understand the people that we're managing. So if you do, for example, have people with specific needs in your team and you're communicating change, I really loved Rachel's example that she uses with one of her sons, where to stop him feeling overwhelmed, it's, okay, what's one thing now and what's one thing next? I really love that. And I'm wondering if you can incorporate that into how you manage and work with some of your team members. What's now? What's next? So that kind of step at a time approach. And then the final thing that I'm left with is, again, this emphasis and importance on the manager, you, as part of the feedback loop. So not only are you helping to facilitate that feedback loop, getting feedback from your team, answering their questions, you are an essential part of that cycle. So feeding down to your team from whether it's the change project team or senior leadership or some other stakeholders. And as importantly, if not more importantly, feeding back up through the loop, the concerns of your team, the questions they have, the ideas they have. So yeah, you are a really important mechanism within that feedback loop. And remember, Rachel, as I knew she would, has been so generous by offering her discount code for her book. So I've put that in the show notes. So I know I sound like a fangirl, and I'm not going to apologise for that because the book is brilliant. But yeah, if you are wanting some great practical, research-based, evidence-based tools and tips to ensure that you communicate change well, then get your hands on a copy of Rachel's book, Successful Change Communication, and you can use her discount code that's in the show notes. Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Now, you've heard the one thing I suggested you do, but maybe there's something else you're inspired to do on the back of today's episode. So here's my question. If there was just one thing you'll do following this episode, what is it? Note it down, or even better, tell someone. Now, I love it when you comment and tell me the things you've been inspired to try after an episode, or even when you send me through a problem you want help with. So please email me at halopsychpod@gmail.com, and the email is in the show notes. Did you enjoy this episode? Then please show your love by leaving a review and giving it a rating. It really helps other people to find my podcast. Thank you once again, and in the meantime, go and manage with confidence.